You're listening to Got Your Six Leadership Forged in Fire. I'm Dr. Traci, a retired U.S. Army officer turned business strategist. This is where I bring real talk, real leadership lessons, and battle tested tools that shaped me as a leader and continue to shape the leaders I coach today. Each episode gives you clarity, courage, and the confidence to lead with intention. Whether the battles you face are in business, at home, or within yourself, let's lock in, get honest, and lead like it matters.
Hey, y'all, welcome back to Got Your Six, the show where we've got your back as you lead, build, and grow. I am Dr. Traci. Welcome back. I'm so glad to have you here with us today. And as always, I've got my partner in everything. He's always by my side in one way or the other. But Michael is here with me today because we're going to be talking a little bit about history in combination with business just a little bit today. We both love history and we thought, what a great way to blend the two together. Welcome, Michael. I'm so glad that you were willing to dive in again with me in this adventure of mine doing Got Your Six.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to be here. It's going to be a good one, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. Whether you're scaling a business, leading a team, or stepping into your next level, we're here to help you cut through the noise and to build momentum that actually lasts. So let's get into it. With the 250th anniversary of our country, Michael and I thought we would have a little fun with this episode. We so many times discuss the many ways understanding history and the many ways it can help us to understand the trajectory of our future, right? But we don't usually share this with public. History can shift our lives in understanding it, understanding all of the different things that can also shift in business. So here we go. Again, 25 years ago, this weekend on 4th of July, a group of people with good ideas, no real permission, just decided to start something from scratch. No rule book, no investors, no guarantee it would even work. Does this sound familiar? Today, we're calling it what it really was. It was the original startup business, a clean slate, if you will. Michael, set the scene for me. 1776, what did the world actually look like for those guys?
Well, they were starting to get fed up at this time because essentially the British, us, I should say, we were getting fed up at the time because the British sent over 10,000 troops to help protect us from different type of attacks. And so they felt like that the Americans should pay for it. So they implemented something called a stamp tax or the Stamp Act,
Mhm.
where basically they thought that they would have to buy all of the paper from Britain with a stamp on it. Otherwise, there'd be issues. And then they also sent over people from England to be the tax collectors. And that didn't last long. Everybody either quit or was tarred with feathered or something along those lines really fast. Not long thereafter, they invented something called the East India Trading Company. Essentially, what that was to give reduced tea cost by importing it directly from India, but they also put a tax on it. So they were like, well, it's a win for everybody. But because they mentioned the word tax again, was reputed instantly. And then, of course, we have the Tea Party, right? Which England spinning. And because it was something like 30 tons of tea was dumped into the harbor. So, well, huge amount of cost behind it. And so England decided that they would squash what was happening by sending troops. And at that time, our country had already started to assemble what was known as the Continental Congress at that time because it was no taxation without representation. And it started the whole American rebellious streak at that time, if you think about it, right? Because one of the things that we take for granted being in America is we're born here, so we see our way of life and we see everything that's wrong with it. So, like that, it could be better here, it could be better there. And this country has this one little tiny piece of something that's better. But when we did, it's kind of like an experiment, if you will, when we did democracy, when we had those ideals, we'll probably mention a little bit later. But within those ideals, what was really interesting is it's never been done before. There was always some sort of dictatorship or like crown involved, right? In other words, God bestowed upon the crown the power to do whatever. And this was the first time in history where it was like form of true democracy. And it was modeled after miscellaneous pieces of different cultures. So, like the Senate, for example, coming from Greece, right? From back in the day.
Yeah, but
But
I
yeah,
mean, these people were just like sitting around having a conversation about this, right? There was no blueprint in our country. I mean, because even the way it was built, it was not even in that aspect, not emulated. I mean, yes, Congress and things like that and Senate were emulated off of other historical successes, but there was no real blueprint, right? These
that,
people were not, they were just enlightened thinkers, probably sitting around a bar, I would imagine, like a saloon or just hanging
right.
out, and they were thinking about English common law and their own experience for running the colonies. What they didn't have was permission, right? They didn't even
Right.
have a playbook. It makes me think of founders the way we look at business owners now. They're people with conviction, building without a manual, pulling ideas together, borrowing from pieces that other people maybe had without stealing somebody's whole idea, because that's ridiculous,
Right.
right? Because why
Right.
start a
Yeah.
business if you're just doing what somebody else is doing, right?
Yeah.
And there's the thing that I want every business owner listening to hear is that this is not a disadvantage, right? I mean, look at our country now, 250 years later. This isn't a disadvantage. This is what founding something actually is. Am I right?
Yes. 100%. You have to think about it as a first to market business, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe it takes a little bit of the marketing from this company and a little bit of operations from that company. So it can build whatever, but it's first to market. So there has to be a whole educational process behind everything. And that's
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
ultimately it took, I think, what was it, 8 or 9 years, I think it was, in order for it to all come together. We didn't even have a financial institution, right? We had to come up with all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thank you to people like Aaron Burr and Hamilton. Am I right?
I know
But
Tanner in particular, yeah, because he was the one that came up. I mean, like,
started the stock market. Oh, you said something about banking. So just brought up the two banks in New York.
yeah. So exactly, he was the one that came up with the whole financial institution.
Yeah.
Was rebuffed for most of everything. In other words, nobody wanted it initially. And
Yeah.
then it was because our country at the time couldn't pay its veterans what it was owed. And
Yeah.
because of that, that's actually what led into actually the stock market, where
Yeah.
they were able to allow private citizens to buy those notes for less money than face value in order to cash them in at a later date at a full price.
Yeah, yeah, I love you
Yeah.
sharing that piece.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this, Michael, in your opinion, if these were founders, what would
Mhm.
you say their actual product was? What do you think, like in tying this into business, if we're looking back 250 years ago, Hamilton, Burr, George Washington, and them all running the streets in New York City, trying to come up with these ideas and ideals and
Mhm.
connecting with people from all over the place to come up with these great ideas, what was their actual product, would you say? What do you think?
Well, it's actually a service as opposed to a
Okay.
product, right?
Okay.
The service would be government oversight,
Yeah.
right? And like
Yeah.
protection of its people.
Yeah.
But
Do
yeah,
you think some of it had to do with freedom, even and self governance and freedom and pulling that together? Because a lot of these laws did allow some people to be more free with the way they were able to live, because then they were getting funded and they were getting money. Whereas prior to that, there were no laws or rules to protect the people, right?
yeah. So it was based all upon like ideals, which were like, even when we look at the time, we always end up looking at it through today's lens. So it was really a very interesting thing because we look at, and we have to pull like slavery into this because there was quite a few like African Americans that fought in the war that just don't get credit for it for independence. And why I am bringing that up is it wasn't like landowners in the South sent slaves necessarily to go fight in their place, but it was more the fact that during this time, yes, there was slavery, but there was a large amount of free African Americans at the time. that were fighting for the ideals. And so even though Thomas Jefferson penned that all men were created equal, he, being a slave owner, he didn't necessarily believe that, right? That's why the three fifths came into play.
Yeah.
And which is really sad in our history.
I think when people think about history, they think about the Civil War and the trials and tribulations. They don't realize during the Revolutionary War and around the era of 1776, when this country was being built and this country, how this bold plan was being written, that these things were still happening in the background of all of this happening. But these laws, Thomas Jefferson and these other people that were trying to speak up for others, trying to make these laws happen, it was still messy, right?
That doesn't even describe it. We turn around and think about like how fractured our government is today. It doesn't even scratch the surface to what was happening
Yeah.
in that time. Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton were at each other's throats constantly.
Constant. Yeah.
Like Jefferson didn't want a United States backed financial institution. He wanted only state. And the reason was because New York as a state was
Yeah.
in debt after the war. Virginia was not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then there was a lot of angst because of that, which is really, really interesting. Like when you really think about it, because literally there were knockdown, like true fights where they were punching each other in the face in Congress.
Yeah, I think when everybody thinks the Declaration was a battle cry, it actually wasn't. It was a position statement, right? And
Yeah.
so, if we were to talk about that a little, what most people get wrong, and you did bring this up a little bit before, was the Declaration wasn't written to inform the British. The king already knew there was a rebellion here. It was written to align the colonies here, the
Yeah.
people here. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? Because I want to really circle this into business, because the
Yeah.
whole thing is what we don't realize today in considering history is all of these things that were actually happening behind the scenes when the Declaration was actually being written over years. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't over one drink at the bar. It was years and
Right.
years of this fighting happening between these senior level people, between the people at the lower level trying to have a voice. So I feel
Right.
like that in a lot of ways, that the whole lesson for business owners is the real positioning, right?
Mhm.
What do you think about that? How would you like
Like
go and
early.
bring Jefferson back into it? But yeah, Jefferson led with
Well,
values, but didn't have grievances. He was very opinionated, right?
yeah. So look, like Jefferson or in that time was like the modern day Hugh Hefner, if you will. I mean, like he was super pretty even back then. Like the war broke out, he went to France, comes back, he has Monticello, but he also has a very affluent apartment in New York City. And why this matters is he brings back all of this French wine and all of this like French furniture and things of that nature. Where if anybody ever wants to throw a party, they always want Jefferson to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I do need to mention about Jefferson that's actually really interesting and that I can correlate everything because it kind of segues is he didn't want and the pursuit of happiness actually in the document. What he actually wanted was the pursuit of wealth. And that's very well documented in history. And thing is that some brighter minds came together and said, not everybody gets to be wealthy. And because of that, we need for everybody to buy into. And so the pursuit of happiness came about. And when you think about like when most people start a business, most people are not necessarily like myself that back in the day when Dallas was a nighttime soap opera and I saw somebody driving a limo, I was like, one day I think I need to have one of those. Right. And then it kind of set my trajectory of like finding jobs and then mowing yards and stuff at a very young age. Legitimately,
Yeah.
by the time I was in sixth grade, I was knocking on doors trying to cut people's grass because I knew that I could make close to $20 an hour in the 80s as a young kid just by cutting grass. Right.
Yeah, we won't even bring up that when you were 5, you were trying to knock on doors selling your drawings to your neighbors. Your this mindset started way before lawn mowing.
But, most people aren't like that. Most people start businesses because they have some sort of trade or craft, and then they see
Right.
a lot of issues within that industry and want to change it. Right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about it, that's kind of what was happening with the US at that point, which was the
Yeah.
colonies, where we were saying that we've been over here for this long. You don't always support us like you said that you're going to support us, and then you want us to pay when you do. It's haphazard how you handle things, right? You only want to protect us when the French are coming over to take over your colonies. That's the only time you really want our Spain, right? And so when it's like that, then of course it starts to rub people the wrong way after a few generations, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
agree.
so that's why they broke off, which is very much if you think about like an HVAC tech coming along and then later going, I'm only making $30,000 a year, and then in the summer I'm working 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week in the blazing heat, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm lucky if I hit $40,000 this year, but the company is literally making,
Millions.
$60,000 a month off of me. And so like
Yeah.
1 month that I work pays for my entire paycheck.
Yeah.
And then so they end up becoming competition because of that.
Yeah, I think that the real positioning in your statement just now is three things. It's what you believe, right? Like that employee. Who is it for? And what you refuse to keep tolerating, right? Because there are a lot of lower level employees that do wind up leaving the company and going to start their own because they're smart enough, right? I think that the
Yeah.
founders, and circling this back a little bit, the founders nailed all three in the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. But the thing is that now, through history, most leaders spin their wheels because they jump straight into tactics. Kind of what you're talking about. They have a great idea, they dive straight in. The grievance list without ever declaring the why, right? And then that's why a lot of small businesses fail 3 to 5 in the first 3 to 5 years. I want to mention that. And it's because they're not sitting back and contemplating the why before they hit the ground running, right? And tactics without declaration is just busy work with better
Mhm.
like writing, right? But the thing is that how many times, and I know you've heard me tell business owners this all the time, is that they get stuck, they can't. So I always tell them you have to slow down before you can speed up, because a lot of them hit the ground running, and then a few years into it, like they're doing great, they're making all this money. A lot of them start because they have this idea and they're like, I can make millions off of this, right? But the thing is, circling back to the top, this person believed everything should be based off of money, but really it has to be based off of the tactics. So when we think about
Yeah.
tactics and we think about history with wars, and I did a podcast last week that had to do with Spartans, we have
Well,
to think about these things, because the declaration for why you're starting your business or even this country, right, should be aspiration, right? It should be all of it. It's not describing where your business is right out the gate, right? It's naming where you want it to go, right? I teach people forecasting all the time, and then figure out what the gap is before you even get started, or early days, right? And I think that the problem is people hit the ground running. They do really well over the first couple of years and they're like, oh, this is
mhm,
just going to be great. But something always happens,
mhm,
right? A competitor or something else happens where things could start going awry. But because they never looked at the possible gap, they are not really sure where that's ever going to go, right? And so I'm just wondering, like, in that aspect, let's do this. What's one thing that you, even in your own business, like you do own your own business, so you have a lot of moving pieces. What
mhm,
is one thing that you refuse to keep tolerating? I mean, thinking back, like how these people in our colonies originally, when this country was
yeah,
being made, there were a lot of people that kept refusing to tolerate certain things. And they were the voice to bark at some of these other senior leaders, right? So what is in
yeah, the
your
sense of
company?
liberty. Yeah.
Yeah. What is one thing that you refuse,
Mhm.
though, to keep tolerating in how you work or lead? I'm throwing you a little under the bus on this. What is one
Well,
thing that you've recognized in yourself? Because we've had to do some shifting in your business recently, not in a bad way necessarily, because everything always
well,
leads to something good, right?
it's
But what is
it's called
something that you've
pruning, but
recognized?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
What's one thing that you refuse to keep tolerating and how you work or lead? Not necessarily anybody else in the company. This
um,
has to do with you. I'm just wondering, maybe in trade, or maybe where you're a little vulnerable or things like that. What do you think?
for me, I think I've been too patient most of my life, right? And most of my life's assets it's been one of those situations where it's always benefited me to have more patience, but in the business world, it doesn't necessarily always benefit them. I know that most business owners are not so patient and I get all of that. But when it comes to employees, we now have a company standard of that they need to be at certain, like at 30, 60, 90, that the new hires have to reach certain marks. Otherwise, during that period, they just let go. And versus other companies. So that was one of those things. But one thing I did want to like backtrack on when you were talking about
Yeah,
how the
sure. I'm
person
sorry.
uh, does really well. That's because business works in cycles and plateaus as you're scaling. And essentially, what happens is every single one of those pieces is a system, as like you teach, right? And within that, they either break or they go through a period of even if you scale, you don't make any more money. So, for example, like in a marketing agency, there's different dollar amounts based upon how much money you make per client, like what the gross retainer is. And so when you're in there, you hit a period where because you have to hire more staff or create more or increase your software for whatever it is that you're doing. Even though you sign 2 or 3 more clients, you have to actually go add more to it in order to make the growth continue. So you go through a small cycle of you could sign 10 clients and literally have the same profit margin, even or not margin, but one amount, even though your gross sales increase, just as an example, because of having to acquire more. But when you break that barrier, what happens is then you go back to those margins again very uh, every process is very similar like that, where you either break it or it needs to be refined or things on that nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really kind of interesting, kind of like if you have so many acres of land to take care of, you could still have room to take on more acres of land to farm, right? But you hit a point where you have to have more staff. So it doesn't necessarily benefit you that much unless you break past that, just as an example. To get really simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering when you brought that up though, can you expound on that just a little bit, that last piece you just said? Because I'm wondering for the listeners, might they not understand what you mean by that?
Yeah. So what happens is that let's just use dollar amounts to make more sense. So let's say that 90,000 a month recurring is a plateau point because let's say that you're just doing, I don't know, $1,500, $2,000 a month retainers. So with that, what happens is now you're at pretty much max capacity for your current staff and all the tools that you use, right? So then what would have to happen is if you sign another person, you actually go down in profitability because you have to hire a staff plus expand. So what'll happen is that once a lot of business owners figure this out innately, which is really funny in my opinion, is they actually stop growing because they don't want to decrease their margin. But what they don't realize is once they get to 5 or 6 more clients, the margins start to come back and then they continue to grow at just larger numbers.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate that because I think that that's a piece that you were explaining that, but I want to make sure that the listeners understand this because, yes, we were talking about history, but now we're circling it back to how things are going right now. One thing I do really want to say to the listeners is if you've never written your own quote unquote declaration as a business owner, you're not leading yet because you have to understand where you're going. So I'd love to tell you, all the listeners, here's your homework. Take a minute and write down the one thing you refuse to keep tolerating in your business. Just like the people in the colonies did 250 years ago, right? Just one sentence that is where your positioning starts, right? I don't care if you've been open for 1 day or 10 years. This is a direction that helps you have your vision, that helps you understand where your future is. I lost my train of thought with what you were saying.
One of the things that we have to think about, I think, and
Yeah.
what differentiates itself from history is at some point when you sell your business, right? And then what happens in America is business as a whole is kind of a low barrier to entry. In other words, like most businesses don't cost a huge startup behind it. Product driven businesses are a little different than service businesses, but most people go into the service industry for that reason. And because of that, like you could end up with a plumbing company that is doing 4 or 5 million a year. And so you're like, I should be able to get a 1 or 2x annual earnings from that business, right? But the everything revolves around the owner. They're going to give you 1 year's profit, right? And that's why there's two reasons why process is so important. Number one, it's not the sexy thing, right? But if you look at our founding fathers, they knew that process was super important. That's why they were willing to spend 8 years of literally fighting with each other, calling each other's names, slandering each other, and everything else, right? And then number two, when we have process, what happens is that it also gives us a certain amount of freedom, right? And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we start a business is it's like you want to work when you want to work, how you want to work, and with who you want to work, right? But the thing is that like even being an employee has its innate risks behind it, just as a business owner. Except what happens is that it's later in life that you feel it. So once you're aging, people stop wanting to hire you. Once you start hitting 55, unless you're in senior management roles, they don't want you anymore. Right? And so, like, there's risks in everything you do. It doesn't matter if it's start a business, it doesn't matter if it's being an employee. But when we understand these skill sets and we develop them over years, what happens is we become better. And then the likelihood of failure becomes much more small, unless it's like we have some type of like COVID or something, right? Unforeseeable. But I mean, that wrecks jobs as well, as we saw.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. I really want business owners specifically. I know most times on my podcast, I talk about a little bit about everybody, right? But
Mhm.
because of this amazing holiday we have coming up this weekend in our country, not just being the 4th of July, but celebrating that we've been here for 250 years, I think that people forget to look at history. You and I talk about this very often, even
Well,
in battles that we fight or wars that we are in these days. We don't ever, a lot of people don't reflect on history. Great leaders have done great things, right? So we should reflect on
well,
those things. And great leaders 250 years ago, it wasn't just about fighting battles. Yes, General George Washington was doing great things, but then he became the
well,
president and those things started shifting and it started looking, what does this country need to look like for our people? And in order for us to change that now, even in our country, we need to look at history. So if you are a business owner and you are listening right now, go back and read some history books to understand how everything started, even for our country, to understand what trajectory maybe you need to move in your business. So I just want to say thank you for all of our listeners. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
one
My
thing,
history partner in crime. Sorry, go ahead. What do you already get?
yeah, one thing I was going to say is you got to remember success leaves clues, right?
Successfully what?
Leaves clues,
Oh,
right?
reach close. Yes. Yes.
Right. And when we look at that and we look at what's been successful throughout time, it literally, we can go back and we can study and learn. And that's actually, I think, what
Right.
makes an individual become more successful is the willingness to learn.
I think
And,
that's true with everything though, right? Just business owners. Yeah.
right. You have to have a certain amount of tenacity will really stick in there when things get hard
Mhm.
and put your head down. Well,
Yeah.
the founding fathers went through periods of depression, much like a business owner does, like when a business isn't doing well. And sometimes things are out of our control, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we just have to plow forward and have that belief. And I think that, like you said, your declaration kind of weighs into the belief side of things. Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say, like I said, the success leaves clues. And so when you stop learning, you literally stop your growth. So you have to
Yeah.
always be seeking out more education, less about industry and more about general business.
And education, I just want to throw this out there before I close, but education, when you say that, you don't mean formal education, because even though I have 5 degrees and you have degrees, what we've talked about so much recently is how education doesn't just mean formal education. It means getting out there and meeting people, going to networking. Don't just go to the same groups all the time. Don't go to the same classes. Go try new things. If you're in HVAC, please, my gosh, don't go to HVAC conventions. Go to something else. Go where people need your service. I mean, how many times do you and I talk about, like, we go to these digital marketing events and people are selling digital marketing to other digital marketers. But what if your client is HVAC people? Go to an HVAC event. They're like bells and whistles. They have no idea what you're doing. Out of your comfort zone. I mean, I love teaching. It's one of my favorite things to do. I mean, one of my degrees is in education, so I do love teaching. But Michael, you also love teaching. And the thing is teaching that in ways that people understand it and learn. So for those of you that are listening to us right now, please know when Michael says learning, he does not mean formal education. He means get out there, read some history books, read some stories that have to do with business books, something that's out of the realm of normalcy for you. I mean, I know for me anyway, I started reading different books in the end of the year last year, and it started my trajectory of thinking completely different this year for certain things. So in that aspect, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I mean, I agree with you 100%, but like find a skill set that you realize that you like and
Ooh,
go study that, right? Whether it's like sales and marketing or offers or management or just psychology, so you can understand why you got this boneheaded employee, right? Like
or
it
client
doesn't,
for that matter. So you can understand people in
yeah.
general.
Like one of the biggest things that a business owner can master that will change the trajectory of their business is dispute resolution or conflict resolution, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's true.
client comes in and they're mad about something and they think it's you, but in reality it's not. But then you got to be able to swing them over so you don't have turn, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, like all those type of things are we always misunderstand skills. We'll say things like attention to detail. We don't understand that there's a set of substack of skills underneath that. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't think in that way, right?
Yeah.
So we just have to break those things down. Like what does that mean actually? And then from there, say, okay, I have this, I don't have that. Right. Because when we start to hold ourselves accountable, then later we can hold other people accountable because we've already walked the walk.
Yeah. I agree. I agree absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that piece actually with our listeners, because I think that that's super important to understand. Okay, so as we close, I just want to mention, I was going to make a joke about the leader's pause that I teach people, but how beneficial,
Well,
like something as simple as you were talking about psychologists, what made me think about it is just a simple concept of just pausing for a couple seconds or pausing for a day before you respond to somebody or before you act on something or react, right? But yeah, it does definitely work. I know that you didn't believe in it before, but you started practicing it every now and again and recognized actually how beneficial it can be to just sit back and take a breath, take a pause, and then have a conversation. Because then you're being proactive versus reactive. Not just you, this is any human being psychologically. When you take a second to be able to analyze something, a lot of times it turns out a lot better. So I just want to say thank you, people, all of our humans that listen to us, all of our leaders. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. If this episode hits something for you, if you're building your own thing, like a declaration for your life without a manual and you're tired of doing it alone, I want to help. I'm opening up a free month in one of my membership groups, real support, real strategy, a room full of people who get what you're carrying. The link is in the show notes. It starts with a quick call because I don't want to just drop you in a random group, because I do have a few different membership groups. I want you to get in the right one where you should be right now in your life. No pitch in the call and no pressure. It's just help, right? The link is in the show notes. But please, guys, here's the thing I want to tell you is that structure and support is really what help people get to the next level. Okay. So until next time, remember, read your history books, Leadership isn't about always holding the position. It's about showing up for the people who depend on you. Go build something that lasts. We'll see you next time. I've got your six. And thank you, Michael, again for joining
Always, yeah.
you. I appreciate our partnership in business and in life. I appreciate everything that we get to do together. And this is just one more thing. Thanks so much.
Leadership isn't found in comfort. It's forged in fire. Life will test you. When you create stability through your choices, you don't just calm the chaos, you build momentum. Stay steady, stay strong, be decisive, and most of all, lead with intention. And remember, I've got your six.